Josh Brown, the raging inferno that is Xbox right now, has more oil to throw on the fire.
Please no.
It's only going to get worse. So we're already about a week or so since the closure of various studios under the Bethesda umbrella. Obviously, they were acquired by Microsoft Xbox. Those studios being Tango Gameworks, Arcane Austin, Alpha Dog Games, and Roundhouse Games. There were some integrations that were going to keep the Roundhouse studio, the staff members going, but the other teams will let go, makers of Hi-Fi Rush and Prey, etc. And it seems like things are only going to get worse, or at least happen again in a few months' time. This comes from veteran journalist Thurrott.com's Brad Sams, saying that more Xbox layoffs / studio closures could happen in July. Sams noted Microsoft's financial year ends in 60 days, and with a new fiscal year, there's always shuffling off the deck when the new year starts. That is the slightly concerning part, that there will be continued shuffling in roughly the July timeframe. I did want to mention, in the week since we reported this, we did a couple of videos on this, the general state of Xbox, the weird ingratiation they've got internally where Xbox has kind of just become Microsoft Gaming, and where Phil Spencer's title was changed ahead of Microsoft Gaming. You can argue that the Xbox brand has already been subsumed by Microsoft Gaming to be this wider thing overall. But in the week since we announced this stuff, or talked about this stuff last week, there are even more closures across the industry. Square Enix have announced layoffs as part of a structural reform across the last few days, and Lords of the Fallen publisher CI Games also had to let 30 staff members go, saying that it was for maximum efficiency and delivering strategic priorities going forward. So this is an ongoing conversation. It's very much not the end of various layoffs overall, and Xbox are swept up in that. But it's worth just touching on this. We've got some more stuff to get to in regards to some irons that Xbox kind of have in the fire. But just thoughts on this is potentially just the first half.
Yeah, man, and that just is daunting, isn't it? We knew it wasn't going to end in January, February, or March when there was a bunch of layoffs happening across the board. But at least I hoped that certain companies would kind of do it once, have their then ducks in a row, and then just not do it again. But the fact that Microsoft laid off a bunch of people, at the start of the year and the end of last year, then shut down these studios, and then are planning to do another shuffling of the deck, as it's described. I think that sucks. It must be incredibly, I don't know, just daunting and overwhelming to be working at these studios and across that publisher right now, because with Tango, with Arcane, and with the other studios that we've seen all throughout this year, it feels like no one is guaranteed. And I don't want to be kind of sat in this news video kind of fear-mongering or whatever, but that is what it is at this moment in time. I wouldn't have guessed at the start of the year, and I'm sure the developers inside those studios wouldn't have guessed that you would have major layoffs at Insomniac or Naughty Dog. We would see the likes of Tango get shut down. So with a few Xbox games on the horizon and a few beloved studios about to release games, I just hope they succeed. That's the sort of line that I'm kind of drawing with this coverage on Xbox. I'm going to go in on Xbox at an executive level, because they have lost my trust. I think the moves that they've made have been just completely dumb, whether that's from Microsoft or whether it's from Xbox themselves. I think they should have known better. They should have secured these jobs. But at the same time, I want these studios and these games to do well. I want Hellblade to come out in 7 days or whenever it is and smash it out the park. I want Indiana Jones to be one of the best licensed games ever. I just want these developers who are now under so much scrutiny to allow themselves to deliver something good, and hopefully that Microsoft views as a success.
So that's the thing, the wider conversation here is that whole idea of Game Pass, that idea of providing funding or allowing various studios to make whatever projects they wanted, with the funding itself coming from the bottom line that was Game Pass, or the monthly subscriptions, however they would change over the coming years, when those studio deals were made. You can go and watch Psych Odyssey over on Double Fine's YouTube channel, which is a documentary that I would recommend overall as to what it's like making a game from a literal napkin sketch all the way through to a final game. But part of that, just because of the reality of the pandemic and then all the stuff that happened with Xbox buying Double Fine, you get to literally see day to day what it's like when a studio gets acquired and what all the attitudes are internally, etc. But a lot of the sell on the Microsoft side, and Matt Booty's in there as well, who is the dude that was responsible for communicating the layoffs last week to the various teams. He's in that documentary saying, we can provide everything going forward. Don't worry, we're not going to mess with you at all. Just keep doing what you're doing. All we're going to do is come in and provide the money and make sure that you can make all this stuff work. And like Josh says, in regards to the games overall, there's still a potential that that dream still comes true. Like, we still have 4, 5, 6 years worth of acquisitions and money put into those teams that you would hope across the end of this year and the next couple of years, that all pays off. Like, you know, you get the Indiana Jones game, you get whatever was in the works from Double Fine or whoever else was acquired, and then it's going to get more awkward after that, depending on how those games sell. Which brings me back around to Hellblade 2, because the current conversation around Hellblade 2 is, are Ninja Theory now in the same position that the likes of Tango Gameworks were, where, you know, is Hellblade 2 going to sell an absolute ton, going to be an undeniable success, going to be a system seller, etc. Like, if reputation and accolades don't mean anything, like if the BAFTA awards didn't mean anything to Microsoft/Xbox, that Hi-Fi Rush won, then if Hellblade 2 does win a bunch of awards and just becomes a critical darling, does that even matter? Do they even care about keeping that going? Are Ninja Theory one of the next studios to be in that conversation, just saying, well, you're not making Call of Duty numbers, you're not making Diablo numbers, etc. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. It's no knock against the reality of bringing that game together. It looks phenomenal, but I think a lot of people are expecting it to be this giant spearhead, tip of the spear for the new wave of Xbox. They might be a bit disappointed. There's a wing of gamers online who seem to think it's going to be like a God of War adjacent thing, like Xbox's God of War, and I assumedly won't be anything close to that. So Hellblade 2 is an interesting one as a specific game in that run of games. But yeah, there's still a chance that the slate of titles that releases are still these grey dream projects for the next couple of years, unless Microsoft really start cleaving in and just saying, well, this was never going to work, let's cut this or whatever.
Yeah, Hellblade's a really interesting one, I think, because it was announced 5 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the first things we ever saw.
Or maybe 2020. I'm sure it was around the time the Xbox Series X itself was announced, so probably 2020. And I want to say I should know my facts, shouldn't I? I want to say they're selling it for $50. I know that they've said that the game is comparable in length to the original, so in my head, we're going to get a much prettier, much more polished version of that first game. We're not going to get a 40-hour God of War style epic or an Uncharted style epic, and I like that, because to me that was the promise of Game Pass, and it was the promise of Microsoft buying these studios. You were going to get a bunch of different styles of game, a bunch of different genre of game, and like games that could be 50 hours, games that can be 5 hours, and they would all have the Microsoft sort of polish and pristine. And from what we've seen of Hellblade 2 so far, I think that kind of, for me, typifies that dream. The worry is what you mentioned, in that I don't think that's Microsoft's dream anymore. I think that
it's not theirs,
not going to be what they're kind of pushing going forward, because we have heard about them doubling down on their core franchises, and we've had messaging from Matt Booty and Sarah Bond and a bunch of other executives.
Phil Spencer's still radio silent.
Phil Spencer's still weirdly radio silent. You have to assume that he's waiting for, I guess at this point, the June showcase they have to come out and publicly say, I don't know, try to assure people. But yeah, like when it comes to these games, do they have the backing to succeed? One, because we've seen barely anything from Hellblade 2 in the run-up to its launch.
It's a week away.
I know. It's crazy.
What are we doing?
It's absolutely crazy. And again, two, what is the metric of success they're looking for with Hellblade? Is it sales? Is it Game Pass? Or is it accolades? Because I do think it has a great chance, like the original did, of winning those accolades. And immediately after they shut Tango and Arcane and did all these layoffs, they said, we want to make prestige games alongside the bigger games. So I feel like I don't trust anything they say, but surely they can't say we want that and then maybe get Hellblade that delivers that and go, yeah, but not from you. Not from Hi-Fi Rush. We want some mysterious award-winning game that doesn't exist from someone.
I don't think the cold number crunchy wing of Microsoft or Xbox care about accolades at all. I think they look at just raw numbers, and they look at the likes of Hi-Fi Rush or whatever it is and go, that's not big enough. They never know what that number is. You can look to the likes of someone like Square Enix never being satisfied with their internal numbers, and I have to imagine in regards to the Xbox gaming division, you can look at console sales being 30% down, you can look at Game Pass growth only being 1% year on year, and that would be enough for a cold-hearted set of statistics to just say this isn't working, let's cleave some studios or whatever. But still, that underlying dream of Game Pass, or that underlying dream of Xbox, has been talked about for the last 4-ish years. The idea that they would acquire all these studios pre the Activision acquisition, but they would acquire all these studios and then have all these dream projects in a row. They once talked about having 12 games a year or something. There was like this insane number about having all these various titles in a row quota, which they didn't hit, and you can blame the pandemic for that if you want. But also, when Starfield came out, I was just looking up the name of this person. It was Xbox's chief marketing officer, Jarrett West, said that Starfield was the starting pistol to finally do this, to finally have all these projects and have everything roll out. And that still hasn't really been the case. Like, Starfield didn't necessarily go down very well, even though we loved it. But they never really seemed to hit anything close to a cadence for releases.
No.
Not to say that they can't do it, but it is that conversation now when you're seeing the studios that would provide that cadence then get shut down because the game that they did put out wasn't big enough.
Yeah, man, what frustrates me is like this was the year to finally see the past 5 years or maybe even longer of Xbox planning pay off, and it almost feels like with the Activision acquisition going through and Microsoft committing to that $70 billion spend, they've kind of come in just as Xbox was really about to start, maybe at least seeing if their initial plan was going to work, and they've undermined it like almost immediately, because this year, you know, we don't know if these games are going to be good, but it felt the closest to what we imagined the Xbox Series X era would be.
Yeah.
We were going to have Hellblade, we've got Avowed on the horizon, we've got Starfield DLC, we've got Fallout 76 DLC, we've got Indiana Jones, and probably more to come throughout this year. These big AAA games from the studios we all love that are finally dropping and will be there on Game Pass day one. And for me, that would have been the test to see if Xbox's plan would work in the long term. But now it feels like the plan has been just completely sledgehammered by Microsoft coming in and going, well, we know you've been planning this for 5 years or however it is, but what if we do things my way and we shut down these studios and we get that number up, baby? Yeah.
There's a lot of, at least it comes across like very cold. It comes across like, let's just focus on the biggest titles possible. And it is almost specifically because of the amount of money that was spent on acquiring Call of Duty, like $70 billion. That is not going to be made back up by the likes of a Hi-Fi Rush or those smaller titles, which is just kind of crazy because that feels directly, the whole Call of Duty and bigger brand stuff does feel directly anathema to what Game Pass was supposed to be. This constant stream of quality and curated titles, and then you plug in the bigger head-turning stuff alongside, like Starfield or whatever. And then if they ever put any money into marketing ever, which is my biggest problem with Xbox stuff, you'd be able to say you're getting all this for one easy monthly fee.
Yeah.
Like, how hard is that? Like, right now, as we're recording this, Hellblade 2 is a week away, and the average person has no idea what that game is, including us.
Dude.
Like, you know, like, there's the nearest thing where you can look at the original and go, it's going to be something like that. But we've seen the beach demo a couple of times. I think there was a more in-depth gameplay demo last year or the year before. There's very little out there for what that game is. And maybe that's because it's quite hard to market, because it's way more of an artistic title. It's more of a walking sim than they want to let on. But at the same time, just get behind your creators.
That's it, man. Like, give it a push. Like, now is surely the time to give these games a push, right? Come on. Like, you've got all of this negative PR, and rightly so. You've got a showcase around the corner. Get people talking about these games that these developers have spent years of their life making, and that you bought them to produce, lest we forget. The marketing sucks for me, because I think their presentations at E3 style shows over the past few years have been class. I think they've been really good, like Phil Spencer and the devs getting out on stage and not taking up too much time with corporate bump and letting the games sort of speak for themselves. I know it's a meme, but I pop for the Xbox World Premieres and what have you.
It's always the promise of something cool.
It is always the promise of something, but like, it undeniably gets me excited for what Xbox might have in the future. But when it comes to actually releasing the games outside of that, I think the marketing is pretty bad. Like, even something like Forza, the return of Forza last year just felt like it kind of came and went. Like you said, Hellblade's on the horizon. I want to see way more from the likes of Avowed and updates on stuff like The Outer Worlds 2. The fact that In Exile have a game coming out that looked amazing, but I can't remember the name of, might be a me problem, but might also be a Microsoft problem. I just think, for me, it comes back down to the idea of, I can blame Microsoft as a company so much, but ultimately, it wasn't Microsoft who made Phil Spencer and co. spend near $100 billion on a bunch of studios. And if they didn't know that spending $100 billion is a lot of money, and they're probably going to have to answer to shareholders and the people above them, and now we're getting these games that are coming and going and aren't really going to do much, like, come on, guys, where's the long-term plan?
My thing with, we'll pivot into something else to the Xbox Showcase that's going to be in June, but like, I have such a theory that there are so many different disparate parts to Microsoft right now, where you have the internal side of things in regards to the closures last week, the Bethesda studios that were shut down. The reason behind that, according to a mix of Jason Schreier and Tom Warren, Jason Schreier over at Bloomberg, Tom Warren over at The Verge, shout out to both of their incredible journalistic work. The whole thing with that seemed to be Microsoft asking ZeniMax to downsize, and then that resulted in ZeniMax cleaving projects that would require more staff to build something new. Tango wanted to make a Hi-Fi Rush sequel. They would need new people for that. So that project was let go. The whole team was just let go. I have such a theory that Xbox, the likes of Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, weren't necessarily part of that decision. I just wonder, it's not that they're not responsible, the buck ultimately stops with them, but just the reality of Phil Spencer not saying anything, and just the way that it's kind of all rolled out, where it seems like you look at Xbox's bottom line, they made $4 billion across the last fiscal year. Microsoft make almost $200 billion. Microsoft don't care about Xbox. No. They just sort of pass something down the line and say, sort these teams out. I wouldn't put it past the reality of this being a horrible mistake. A horrible corporate mistake. And that's why Phil Spencer hasn't said anything, because if they were consulted at all, they would have said, not those teams, not those people. ZeniMax would obviously know their own teams, but I don't know, having worked around big cold corporate for a while, I just wouldn't put it past them at being this stupid error.
I think you're right. You know, I can't imagine either of those actual Xbox executives making this decision. Layoffs, probably yes. Studio closures, I can't see that for the reasons you just described. And I think you can even see that in the responses so far, like the contradictions in their responses. That painful Sarah Bond interview where she just couldn't answer the question of why these studios were shut down. And my theory is, similar to you, just because it probably wasn't their decision.
They know exactly.
They've been told, we need to make this amount of money, close these studios down. This is how we do it. Sorry, deal with it. It's your company. But I will say before I finish, sorry.
No.
While I do kind of sympathize with that, I go back to exactly what you said of it might not have been their decision, but it is a huge part their responsibility because they ultimately set this path into motion. They made those promises, and if they didn't know they could follow through on those promises, not to meddle or not to have shutdowns and let Arcane and let Tango make kind of the games they want to make, it's their responsibility for making those promises and now having that blow up in their face now when they've spent too much money and Microsoft kind of come in and it's like, how can we trust you again, guys?
Well, yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it is as comically simple as they just were not part of those decisions. It was something handed down from Microsoft. Again, it doesn't abstain them from responsibility whatsoever. They're still the heads of those companies, the likes of Matt Booty, Sarah Bond, Phil Spencer. I just think Phil Spencer's lack of anything speaks volumes, like complete silence from the head of the company that would usually be the first person to dive in and talk about it. Like that infamous Kind of Funny interview where he was just out there trying to field one of the last times a big furore happened. Like maybe in his position, you wake up one morning and you get told that this has happened and you have to try and deal with it. Sarah Bond doing that interview over on Bloomberg felt like someone deer in the headlights. I'll give you the most corporate response I can give you because I'm still trying to figure out why I'm in this position in the first place.
I know like these companies at that level have always been kind of close to politicians in a way, but man, like looking at the responses, watching those interviews, it's like watching a politician dodge the questions. You know what I mean?
You get taught how to do that.
It is just like, all right, okay, so there's not really any transparency. You can pretend to be like the good face of gaming and have the consumer in mind, but ultimately, like, it's your job to defend these decisions, whether they're your decisions or not. You are that high up in the company where you can't go, actually, these Microsoft guys, it was their fault and they suck. You're out of there,
You'll get that in like a tell-all book. There'll be a Phil Spencer book in like 10 years' time when all of his NDAs have expired or his contracts or whatever have expired. But in the moment, I see people fielding, like whether they, however responsible they were, doing a bad job of fielding the response to all this stuff. Last thing to talk about is just the fact that Xbox do have a conference June 9th, so it's not even that far away, where they could have various games that would turn heads. You mentioned the presentation style that they sort of debuted in the last one of these, which was a really cool look at the Indiana Jones game, Avowed or whatever, and a really good way of transitioning between them. It's literally Nintendo Direct's approach. That's what everybody's been doing ever since Direct started, and Nintendo started doing that back in 2016, 2017. But still, it worked very well, and maybe they have have things that will turn heads there. Perfect Dark, though, is a very specific game to talk about. Like, one, as a franchise, it's missed like 3 generations of gamers. Like, the last Perfect Dark game was Perfect Dark Zero on Xbox 360, 2005 or 6.
Yeah.
I think it was a launch game for the 360.
Yeah.
The game before that was obviously the follow-up to GoldenEye by Rare on the N64, which in itself was quite overlooked because the PS1 had taken off so much. Even though people obviously love Perfect Dark, as do I totally get it. But my point is that when the Series X came around, or the next generation of Xbox came around, they were like, we're reviving Perfect Dark because we have Rare, we have the devs, we have the minds behind this IP, and we're going to do this sort of third-person revival thing for Perfect Dark. And then internally across the last few years, all the reports came out that the game would barely come together. They have lost a lot of the key creatives that were part of the Initiative team, they were called the Initiative, to make this new game. And then that became the whole conversation. The game's on fire, it's not going to come together, it's another thing that Xbox has messed up. But then across the last week or so, we had Jeff Grubb from Giant Bomb saying that the game is actually maybe going to be at the conference, that it's actually not that bad, and a lot of games of this size do come together in the closing months, which was the case for God of War, the 2018 God of War. That thing was on fire until 2 months before launch, if you believe the reports. And so maybe Perfect Dark is okay.
Yeah.
Is Perfect Dark the thing that's going to turn heads?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so. I want it to be. I'm trying to be optimistic about the games, but that IP it means a lot to a certain generation of gamers, but it would have to be something special, I think, to get people to turn heads, because it doesn't have the name recognition to just sell, I don't think. And they have been billing it as the quadruple A game to end all quadruple A games, right? But whether that's going to happen, because the last time a quadruple A game came out, it was called Skull and Bones. And I think that title and that marketing sort of phrase is just poison at this point. It doesn't work, especially with the reports, like you said. I want it to be good. I want that to be good. I want other reboots like Fable to be good. But honestly, talking about stuff like Perfect Dark, it again makes me put more responsibility on the Phil Spencer side of things, because, like, lest we forget, it was Phil Spencer's reign that gave us Halo 5 and Halo 5 and Halo Infinite. I suppose Halo 5 was probably in development before, but still, Halo Infinite. We had the Forza game coming out last year. We've had Redfall. We've got Perfect Dark and the issues with that studio. Like, we've got them turning down Spider-Man back in the day, before Sony acquired it, and it's like these decisions have been bad. The studios have arguably not been well run under Microsoft's tutelage. So I just hope it all comes together, but I've got no kind of evidence pointing towards that direction.
I know. The thing is, like, obviously Xbox, if there's many things that it's associated with, it is third-person shooters. It is Gears of War. Like, there are those tentpole franchises. Apparently there's a new Gears game going to be at the showcase as well. Gears is another IP that has a massive association with a certain generation of gamers. I'm not knocking it overall. I love Gears. But I am curious if Gears can do it for them in the same way that it used to. I just think the Xbox brand is largely kind of effed at the minute. I don't think that to be one franchise that'll turn it around. It will be a handful, and then if they put any money into marketing, it will be reminding people that you can get all of this for one fee or whatever. But yeah, Gears is probably going to be there. But in regards to third-person shooters, like, if they just go straight gameplay with the new Perfect Dark, and it has some innovative way of third-person shooting, the third-person genre is so underserved right now. Like, the nearest thing that we get to it is the likes of something like The Division or whatever, where it's in terms of like a cover shooter. Like, it feels like you could do something more innovative with that template and remind people that was part of Xbox's DNA for back in 2006 onwards.
Yeah, man, I fully agree. Honestly, the slate that could be announced at this conference, I think could turn heads. I think could be good. Perfect Dark, if that turns out to have a killer gameplay trailer, I think those reports about it having a tumultuous development, like, people will be like, well, it's got there in the end. It's got over the line. If that has a blinding trailer of Gears 6 is announced and is anywhere near as good as Gears 5, which absolutely rules, that's a win. You've got updates from Avowed, you've got The Outer Worlds 2, you've got more on Indiana Jones, which hopefully looks a little bit better, Starfield, all of these games that are on the horizon and are about to release. Like, the games themselves, fingers crossed, feel like they're in a decent state, if not a good state. It feels like if we didn't just have these closures, Microsoft would be cooking up a pretty good showcase, in my opinion. But that is just my opinion. You might be there thinking, who wants a Perfect Dark? Who wants another Fable?
True.
Who cares about Gears 6? I don't think it excuses what is happening on the business side, but again, like, I want the games to succeed. So I'm hoping June 9th comes around and they have all of these big hitters and they prove us wrong with Perfect Dark, and Fable looks amazing, and it's all available on Game Pass, and Treyarch's next Call of Duty gets its own direct and rules in and of itself. Like I don't think Microsoft as an executive team deserve it, but I think the developers deserve it.
Oh yeah, the creators, the coders, the art departments, the teams actually bringing these projects and visions together are the ones that we'd like to see what you've been working on with all the backing of Game Pass and Microsoft money into this point. But yeah, as a wider company, I don't have any faith in them actually going to those teams and making sure they deliver what a lot of people want to see. I'll believe it when I see it at this point, because I feel like they've coasted by on assumptions for most of the generation.
You're right. Yeah.
And the assumption that the next showcase they'll nail it, and they did on the last one, the one that had Indiana Jones and Avowed. That was very solid, and there was a feeling when Hi-Fi Rush dropped that this is the beginning of the next wave of Xbox, and then it didn't do anything, and then we got it again when Starfield happened, and it didn't really do anything. So there are a lot of back and forths, but yeah, the actual showcase itself is in June. But whether Xbox can claw back the sheer amount of negative optics around their brand right now is a wait to be seen kind of thing.